everybody. Welcome back to Digital Donuts. This is our gaming book club podcast where me and Orefather meet together once a month to discuss the latest game that we've played and to just kind of talk about it more from a game developer / game design perspective. And this week, or I guess this month, we have decided to play and go over the video game Inscryption. Initial spoiler warning, we will be talking about everything and anything to do with this game, at least everything we remember about it and everything we have written in our notes. So yeah.
All right, spoiler warning out of the way, let's get started. So, quick details on Inscryption. We played on PC. It was released October 19th, 2021, and with 54,000+ overwhelmingly positive reviews, we are going to add our review to that. We freaking enjoyed the game. Game was very, very excellent, very atmospheric game. To give you a real brief overview, game is largely a card game where you're playing against the computer. There's a great plot going on, really good atmosphere, as well as some puzzles within the room outside of the game. So less of just playing the game over and over, but you're in a room, you play the game, and then there's some kind of escape room style puzzles along with it. It is crazy fun. We had a lot of good times, and we're going to tell you about it.
Yes, for sure. I very much enjoyed this game. We're going to go ahead and go right into first impressions. So when I first booted this game up, it begins with like this 8-bit kind of style for its main menu, and the game does not have a new game button. It just has the continue. And at first I was like, okay, well, I guess it's going to be one of those kinds of games. And so I click continue, and you start off in this dark room with like this eerie music, and you're like in this cabin area, and you're sitting at this table, and this guy's like, oh, hey, let's play a game. And so then you begin your whole card adventure. And the atmosphere was definitely the biggest first impression for me, where the game was consistently, especially that first bit, was so creepy and unsettling, but in like the best way. And it also reminded me with how you later learn his name is Leshy, how he describes everything. It very much reminded me of Dungeons and Dragons, and it just overall set a really cool tone. And it was just a really fun time, and it really just sucks you in. It's so creepy, but so like addicting, I guess.
Right.
What about you?
It was so original. I agree. The atmosphere was such a massive part, and the first thing that just grabs your attention. As you start playing, you don't know anything. You don't know what's going on, why you're here, but you're like, you immediately feel, okay, something is wrong. Everything's wrong. This is ominous. Who is this guy? He's draped in shadow. You can only see his eyes, which change colors. The map is very like Dungeons. You get a quick, like, I'm playing D&D with a psychopath right now. What is going on? And we'll get into a little bit more of some of like the mechanics and gameplay of the actual card game, but the mechanics, the graphics, everything like that just played on top of each other so well with this like semi-horror vibe, almost like you're fighting for your life without it being a constant intense battle. In a lot of games you'll get like the music cranks up and and you're like, oh, this is the boss fight, or for example, in Destiny, it says, hey, your respawning has been restricted, or something like that will happen to let you know, hey, this bit's intense here, like focus up, and you get hyper-focused. But in this game, despite the entire thing being you in a desperate fight for your life against this bizarre person and all the other things that happen later down the line, you don't feel like exhausted from the intensity and from the stakes. They never like lower. Just as you progress, even though you're dying sometimes, you still feel like engaged and want to keep going and discover like what's coming next.
Yeah, 100%. It really just solidifies itself in your mind immediately. It is immediately like classic. It reminded me And I'll discuss this a little bit when we go into graphics, but it reminded me a lot of like old PS1 like video game stuff.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Absolutely.
But I guess with that we can probably go ahead and transition to the graphics and the sound design.
Oh yeah. Such a big part of the game for me is that first impression of, okay, I've heard a lot of good stuff. The trailer was pretty whack, but I didn't really watch any details. How is this going to hold up as visually? Because when it comes to card games and deck building, stuff like that, you generally kind of lack on the visuals and atmosphere because the point isn't the atmosphere, the point is the card game. Look at something like Hearthstone, which is an incredibly well-built game. That's very deck oriented, very card based. That's the whole entire game. And the atmosphere is you're playing a game and it's about cards and you're done. And even if you know some of the characters in the cards, that's cool. But the dark, deep atmosphere that was present as soon as you load up really translated well into communicating to the player like your position is not one of strength right now. You are on the defensive the entire time. Everything's in shadow, your opponent's in shadow. All the lighting is very like strategically, you just see these details, everything. I'm gonna keep saying the word shadow over and over because it's like dark. It's a dark game.
Yeah.
I switched the lights off in my room when I was playing. I was like, oh, I gotta get like the most out of this. And it was just a dark, spooky game where everything that changed, like you noticed every little detail because there was so little to grab onto. That I think translates really well into this story that they're trying to do. And the sound was great. Highly recommend if you're going to be playing this using a pair of headphones. I played some of it on speakers and some of it on headphones. Headphones really obviously brought it in more. A lot of the sound wasn't your kind of straight up, here is the soundtrack for the video game, which is what most games do, which is fine. But this one with the story elements, a lot of the sound is these atmospheric sounds and the wood creaking, the tack of the tokens on the table, the shuffling of cards, the weighing of scales as things move around. There's no like theme bumping around in the background or a soundtrack to listen to. There's just the environment. And it's so prevalent and so well built that you just feel sucked into the environment. It's great.
I definitely agree. I remember going back to what I said about this feeling like an old PlayStation 1 game. I remember I had the old like Tomb Raider game, like the original Tomb Raider game on my computer as a kid. And I would always have to have my dad play it because it always spooked me so much. Just the fact that, I mean, there wasn't any like active lighting. Nothing could be well lit, mostly because I don't know if they knew how to, or you know, when you were in a dark environment and the low resolution and low poly everything contributed so much to you just feeling totally unsettled. It's like this uncanny valley type of feel. And this is exactly the same feeling I got with Inscryption. I am such a sucker for this kind of art style where those assets and everything are clearly made using modern software, but because we can make something using modern software and put them in an environment that makes it look low resolution and low poly, makes it feel high quality yet old school. And I think that honestly contributes not only to the overall graphics and design of this game, but also the narrative of the game and what it's supposed to be. And we can get into that a little bit more when we talk about it. But yeah, it was creepy and dark, like you said. It was hard to see stuff. I don't think I played a single frame of this game with the lights on in my room because I couldn't. You know, as soon as I saw like this music and the setting, I was like, okay, this is a lights off type of game.
Oh yeah.
And so it is so nice. And like you said, with the sound design, the ruffling of the cards, everything feels, it's kind of a minimalist sound design where it's not, there's not really a choir, there's not really an orchestra, or I mean, that's more soundtrack, but there's not really super in-depth sound effects. You know, you click a thing and it does a thing and it makes a sound effect for the most part, you know.
Hmm.
But it contributes 100% to that low poly design. Like I love being able to look at something and see it looks low effort, but it feels high effort.
Yeah, yeah. That translated so
Yeah.
well in the other acts of the game as we move from these very very different scenes to other scenes, and all of them still kept the like retro vibe, but not so retro that it's low quality or there's not a lot of functionality or it's, just the constraints of the time. It was just the vibe and the feeling and the look with all this high quality equipment where,
Hmm.
especially in Act 2, everything goes very like early gameplay, very base. I'm getting Mario or early Legend of Zelda vibes where it's very bits and just 8-bit things, but it still felt, you still had like smooth transitions, great audio that sucked you in, even though there wasn't really music, you still wanted to listen. Even though, there was the whole time, there's subtitles, there's things to read. You don't need the sounds, but it was such a huge part of me getting involved in the environment. Even with no music or nothing like that, I wanted to hear it. I wanted to hear the tokens and hear the paper and hear the creaking as I moved around the house, clicking things, unlocking puzzles. Like that was so important to me.
Yeah, and I think I can't understate the sound design area specifically. Like you said, when you're reading text and people talking to you, it's very much like I mean, I guess it's my only frame of reference really would be like the Undertale style,
That's what
or
I was thinking. Yeah.
maybe even Animal Crossing,
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
where you have this text come out, but you have a sound effect for how they say things, and
Mhm.
you can get their personality in the sound that plays
How did they do
when
that?
they're
It was
talking.
so
I don't know
good.
how they do
I
that.
was
It's
shook.
so good. Yeah, it's great. And so I see, especially with Leshy, man, you
Mhm.
hear his voice, and especially as that being going back to the first impression, it's just whoa, 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 whoa,
Yeah,
whatever it is.
yeah.
And it's so good. Um, but I think going into, you said, there's not really a lot of music. Let's go ahead and move into music and in that section. So I think the standout for me was 100% the boss fights. The
Oh,
music during the
yeah.
boss fights, whereas for the most part of the game, it's very much you're not hearing anything.
Mhm.
But as soon as the boss fights kick in, you have these very, very cinematic sounding,
Mhm.
soundtracks that come in. And my favorite one was probably the Trappers, when it's just like,
Oh, man.
mm, like it's just like this deep,
Yeah.
like type
The
of
rhythmic, like repetitive, like growl almost.
yeah, it just builds this. It feels so good. It just feels so good to be there in the game. I also love the final boss. Well, the what I thought was the final boss music. Um, so yeah, I mean, what was your standout? What was your favorite song from this?
I think just like you're saying, those first few bosses you fight, what, like 3, I think, in the first act, and
Mm-hmm.
all of those, like, my blood pressure like rose as soon as I heard their thing. I just distinctly remember the angler, as like I could just, like, you could hear the ocean or just feel water, but in like this sick twisted way. I was just astounded. The music personified the enemy you were facing extremely well. And that
Mm-hmm.
was just a huge boon to the game, that it didn't feel like the game had gotten intense. I felt that it was intense because of this character. Not, oh, this is the
Yeah.
hard part of the game. I was like, oh, I freaking, and the first bit's a roguelike. So if you die, you like lose all your stuff and you're freaking dead. And all you're building this deck throughout this first act and you lose all. And as soon as I get to a boss and you'd hear that music, that rhythmic growl, or just, the sound of hammers in the background or something like that. Even with with the other NPCs you'd meet, the sound effects would change in the background based on what they did for you or could do. And I'd get, minor little PTSD from the last time I freaking lost here. And I'm like, dang, like the angler took me like 3 hours. Like I was trying and the game just did not click. And the angler had just been this huge obstacle for me for every time I was like, how am I supposed to win? And I hated fish, man. I was so mad.
Yeah, I remember you were there. You were like, what do I do?
I was like, this is impossible.
What do I do?
How do I win?
And I was like, just be patient. You'll figure it out. Just like solve puzzles around the cabin. You'll be okay.
Right.
And so.
Oh, man. That ended up working, kind of bringing us into like the mechanics of Act 1. Was a lot of stuff to learn, and at the beginning you didn't really think that there was. As you start out, you get some cards, and it's a very basic, like very similar almost to Magic the Gathering, if anyone's played that, or to Yu-Gi-Oh, where there's monsters on the field and you're not trying to kill the monsters, trying to kill the player, the person behind them, deal enough points of damage, then the game's over, you win the round. But monsters can block and all that, and we can get a little bit more into kind of how that ended up playing into the gameplay. But at the beginning, you learn this simple card game, which is pretty fun. And as you begin to play through Act 1, you keep getting introduced to more and more concepts. At the beginning, the way the cards work is you have to either play one. Some cards are free to play onto your little field, and some of them you have to sacrifice another creature or 2 or 3. And so a higher, more powerful card will likely require 2 or 3 other cards on your side of the table to be sacrificed for you to play. And I was like, okay, that's like a fun mechanic. I gotta like manage who I've got out and how valuable are based on what else I'm gonna bring out. And then they introduced the concept of bones, where when a creature dies, you get a bone token, and some creatures are bones. And as you explore the house around you, you begin to use those same mechanics to solve puzzles, which was really clever. The game didn't just transition from, okay, you play a card game here, and then over here you do a rhythm game, and over here you have like a light puzzle. It was like everything is this game. This has to do with the game. This has to do with the game. You cannot solve this puzzle until you understand this game mechanic or until you've reached this bit. And the way that they designed this game and then built the game around the card game, right? I'm saying game a lot, but if you follow me, like it was really, really interesting and really involved to help the player just absorb how the game is played and then to improve their ability on it step by step.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this Act 1, I think, is the strongest part for most people based on what I've seen.
I agree.
And this is Act 1. This is once you beat the final boss, which is Leshy, this guy you were facing the whole time. That is when the game transitions into a whole nother style. Mm-hmm. But I think I did love this first game, and I think the game kind of understands that this is the strongest part of the game. Mm-hmm. Not to say the other parts aren't fun, because I do think they are, but they're fun in different ways, and they're fun for different reasons. But this first act really has so much personality, so much character, so much unique aspects where you do miss it after I don't think you quite realize you miss it until the end of the game, and the game does a very, very effective way to help you realize how much you miss it, which we'll get into in a minute. But I think this Act 1, you like get a relationship with your deck, and I think that's kind of how it works for most roguelikes. You get a relationship with your tools and your guns and your weapons with whatever you're using as you play. But for this one, it really, especially since some of the cards talk to you, you're like, this is my deck. I have created this, and this is my tool that I'm going to use to beat this guy.
Oh, yeah.
And it is incredibly satisfying. And I just want to say probably one last thing about Act 1, and I guess this goes the same for most of the other acts, is that it has such a satisfying power creep. It has such a satisfying feeling of not knowing anything, and then it clicks, and then all of a sudden you start to realize, and then the fun doesn't become like figuring out the puzzle. The fun becomes, I know what I need to do, and some battles are still going to be difficult because they're just going to be hard battles. but it is going to be fun because I have conquered it and I understand so much more about the game and I have the right cards and I've solved the puzzles to make me better. It's almost impossible to play through Act 1 long enough because this game really does like to let you break the rules. It likes to let you do some stuff that goes against what you would normally be able to do in any card games. And I think that's 100% on purpose because the longer you play Act 1 or any of them really, the easier the game becomes and the more domination you have over the field. And so it's kind of one of those, it's a roguelike where it's only a matter of time before you beat it, more so than it is just straight up, you have to be a certain amount of good or else you'll never beat it, which I really appreciate because that's normally my biggest hang up for a lot of roguelikes is because I just don't want to spend the time to get that good. Yeah, but anyways, I think we can go ahead and transition into Act 2. And I guess this is where the narrative comes in for a big part. There's two stories going on, kind of. I mean, they're all tie into one, but there is the game story that's going on where you are this person trapped in a cabin and you beat Leshy and find the new game button. But once you find this new game button, once you finally beat Leshy, the camera dies. And then you realize, you're actually playing from the perspective of someone in real life or in, quote unquote real life who is recording themselves playing Inscryption, a digital game. And you realize that the history of this is that he is some kind of YouTuber or whatever who opens cards for a living. And his name is Luke Carter, or his online alias is the Lucky Carter. And you watch his little story through these real life recordings of him opening these cards, and he's saying, "Hey, today we're gonna be looking for this great shiny card," or whatever. And he gets a message on one card when he's opening a pack for this card game Inscryption, and it has an address or it has GPS coordinates, and so he's like, that's like right by my house. And so he goes and checks it out. He finds this floppy disk. He decides to buy a floppy disk online. And lo and behold, it is for the game that we are playing, Inscryption. And so that turns into something a little bit more. You beat him, and then you get the new game button. And as you finally click this new game button into its spot, you have to actually exit back to the main menu, which I think is super fun. That was cool. When you finally get the new game button, you have to actually exit out to the main menu because otherwise there's nothing else to do and you're just trapped in a room. Yeah,
I stood there for like 5 minutes, like clicking on stuff. Yeah. I'm like, did I do something wrong? I don't want to just leave and start a new game. I want to keep this game going, but eventually that's all you can do.
And clearly it's made for that. So you get the new game button in there, you click it, and this text on the side of the screen is like reloading, deleting corrupted chunk, and it's just line after line after line of code or whatever that's saying, we're resetting the game. And it cuts back and this cutscene starts and it tells the story of 4 scribes who you learn Leshy is one of them, and he used his camera to inscribe stuff onto cards. And these people are the ones who created cards and all this. And there's like some lore there. And so I pretty quickly pieced together like, somehow Leshy got control, because you realize some of the cards that were talking to you are actually some of the previous scribes that you were playing as cards. And so you realize, somehow Leshy created this world, and now the game is 2D and like 8-bit.
Oh yeah,
pixelated.
Very retro, very full tone shift.
And now it's no longer dark. It's very, very bright and very much more like a traditional card deck building game, whatever. And so that's kind of what I figured is at that point. I was like, it looks like he took over somehow and put these guys into cards, and now that we did new game, what he did before was reset, and so now we're playing what the game was originally intended to be.
You get this
which I'm no, I was just saying that, which I'm pretty sure was the point.
Right? Yeah. I mean, the exact same thing happened to me. It wasn't like I was the whole time I was wondering, like, dang, am I doing branching paths or anything like this? But we had very similar experience. This new act, this act two, where you're playing this very 8-bit version, kind of back in time almost, and you get to go around. There's 4 bosses to fight all of a sudden, and when you die, you don't like die. It's just like, Pokemon, where you just run and do a battle, and I lost. Okay, let me go wander around the world and get some more cards and reorganize my deck and try again. And it's a whole, like, I had to like pause for a minute. I was like, what? My life's not in danger? In the previous game, or in the previous act, you're doing some like crazy stuff, like ripping your teeth out, gouging eyes. You're getting killed, and like Leshy's this creepy, horrific thing. And now it's like this cheerful music's like doot 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 doot, and you're like walking around like, okay, well, what's going on here? And then suddenly you're hearing about this guy. You get this whole tonal shift of everything's a lot more chill now, and there's this whole side story of what this game is going on with the cards, with our lucky Carter, with our real life guy and his camera. Playing this second act was really, really fun, because the game is still the same card game you've been playing in Act 1, but they expound upon the system they had there to include both a lot more cards and a new type of system. So at the beginning you had like sacrificing cards with blood, and then you had bones, and in this second act you've got both of those mechanics still, and you're playing this game, but there's more cards, and there's this whole like wizard mechanic, and this whole like other thing where they have setting up circuits,
electricity
cards. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's these 4 bosses, and each boss has their own way of setting up their deck for different abilities. And it was so fun, because all of a sudden I have a ton of options, and I get to like customize, like, what do I play best with? What do I like? What do I dislike? And I was like, oh, I love this. I don't like this. I want these cards. And you get this huge amount of deck customization and a lot more battles to do in a very relaxed environment. And the shift was a bit abrupt for me, and I had to I waited till the next day to get back into it, to kind of like reset myself a little bit. But once I got going, I was like, dang, I know how to play this game. This is fun. And like you mentioned earlier, once you master the game, the challenge is no longer, dang, this is so hard. It's like, all right, hit me with something crazy. And sometimes the bosses will hit you with just the weirdest setup on their end, and you're like, how do I counter that? Or the entire board is blocked off by like rocks and trees, and you're like, there's nowhere to put cards. What do I do? And everything changes so much. And each new challenge doesn't feel like, oh, another obstacle. It's a new opportunity and a fresh something, I'm ready to tackle it. And I loved the shift there, how well they expounded upon the game. Kind of the first act was a great game in on itself. And then they just said, dang, what if we just put like everything we could fit into a sequel into the same game? What if let's
just do another game?
And I was like, I feel like I just got 3 DLCs for free. What the heck? I thought the game was over. Like the new game button, I was like, all right, I'll just run it again. I guess that was pretty quick. So fun. What a great like lore dump, a bunch of information about the characters and about what's going on, and such an expansion into the card game that really sucks you back in and says, hey, you're not done yet. There's more to learn. There's different ways to fight. Like, learn how everything works. Figure it all out. Try some different decks. Mess around. And the whole time, oh, it's great too, because one of these 4 bosses is Leshy, this guy you've been trapped for hours with in Act 1. And when you go to his place, dude, I was so creeped out, because I was like, there's the angler, and there's this guy, and there's that guy. I'm freaking out, dude. These guys terrified me. They haunted me for hours for this whole thing. Multiple characters. And now he's just kind of like chilling. And he's like,
yeah, now they're just like sub bosses, and they're like, hey, get me a picture of my dog.
Yeah, and you're like, you killed me. You were violent and terrible.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, just chilling. Do you like fish? I'm like, no, I'm traumatized. But it's like in the past when none of that's happened, and this corruption hasn't happened to Leshy. And yet throughout your interactions with everybody, you begin to see these seeds of impurities would be a good way, of these like major character flaws within all of them, whether it's the horrific things they're doing to students. The wizard, for example, is doing these horrible things to his students. Oh, I'm gonna be real. The guy that you meet in the wizard tower, one of his students has been like trapped in this void forever, right? And he's
Mm-hmm.
the funniest guy because he's like sensation or whatever. So
Sensation.
and he
Yeah.
was
Oh,
so
and then
funny.
when you're in the boss fight, you actually see him dancing around,
Yeah, he's just like chilling.
or by your deck. He's like dancing
Oh
with the
my God.
music. It's
That
awesome.
guy was so
Uh,
funny. Anyway,
which deck did you choose at the beginning of Act 2?
I went with the Necromancer deck.
Oh, okay.
So
Sweet.
I
I went with the wizard deck because I was like,
Ooh,
oh, wizards are cool.
Wizards are cool. The wizard thing was like
Yeah.
a whole bit to learn. That and the computer one were like new stuff to learn.
Yeah.
And it took me a little bit to figure those out. For a while, I just played with like a blood bone deck because I knew how to
Mhm.
work those. Man, that sounds so cool when you say it out loud. Yeah, blood bone deck. You know, I was pretty sick.
Yeah.
That sounds dope. Anyway, I played with that for the most of it, and then as I figured out what the power cells that you charged up did, and how circuitry worked, and how some of the wizard cards could be cast at certain times, I was like, okay, and began to like build a little bit of like an all incorporated deck, but it was still very blood and bone based because I wanted to
Mhm.
complete the game, and I felt the most confident in that, and that worked out pretty well for me.
Yeah, one of my favorite things about Act 2, I do think this is probably where a lot of people would get lost, and this would be where the game loses them, because like you did, I also had to take a break for a couple of days to come back and reset mentally after beating that first boss, because I was like, shoot, I thought I was done with this game, but I guess I have a whole lot more game left to go. And granted, I do think Act 2 and Act 3 are a little bit shorter than Act 1. But they still change up the gameplay so much that it is essentially you're playing a different type of game. Like, it's still a card game, but you're still playing. It feels like a completely different game. But again, the Act 2 is a great example of the power crawl and how you go from being really crappy to mastering it. Because I remember first with a lot of deck building games, I look at them and I'm just like, oh, so overwhelmed, and you're just kind of fumbling around in the dark for a while. But once it clicks good and it clicks hard, and then you just end up with this awesome deck from, like, you have wizard cards and you have electronic cards, robot cards, beast cards, necromancer cards, and you have all this awesome deck of all these different cards. And it's just super, super powerful. And you just end up, you feel like you have created that deck and you have mastery of it. I mean, and that's probably the same. I mean, it's the same hook as other card building games or deck building games. But this one, it really keeps it fresh. And a lot of these characters and all the bosses are fun. Probably my second favorite soundtrack song in this whole game is during the wizard fight, the final boss wizard. I love that soundtrack or that song because it was just, I don't know, it's so unique and so fun, and all of the bosses have their own unique songs, which I think are really fun.
It was so great to see them really expound upon what their game could be, and in such a way that involved you in it. And the lore was great too, because at the same time, you're like not learning the game from scratch. So it's a lot easier to pick up these new mechanics and to kind of compensate for that, where I'm like, oh, okay, let me figure this out. Okay, I figured it out. All right, moving on. To compensate for that, you start getting a lot more lore. You start following this character as he starts learning, this real life guy who's found this game, as he tries to figure out some of the lore behind what Inscryption itself is. And so we begin through these videos to start telling the story of, what's his name? Luke, right?
Luke Carter,
Luke Carter.
Which is just a very convenient last name.
Exactly. So Luke Carter, as we follow Luke, he's like recording little like vlogs of like, hey guys, so I found this game called Inscryption. I didn't know it was a video game. I thought it was just this card game. That's super weird. Hey, this game's super weird. And he starts trying to figure out more information about it. And it was really refreshing and like intriguing to jump occasionally after a boss fight or after something had happened back to Luke. And we'd watch a few videos as he tries to delve more into the lore and history and what is this game? Why is it the way it is? Why did I have to dig it up out of the woods? I was over here like, how is it all fitting on a floppy drive? Like, my dude, that is the mother of all floppy drives. It's huge.
Yeah.
Or a floppy disk. And as we follow that it was really interesting too that we had started this new game, and so we knew that Leshy was gonna, had taken over in a previous iteration, and in this next act, because there's more, surprise, surprise, we move into not Leshy but to the computer guy,
CP03 or something.
Something like that. I don't remember because it's like numbers and characters.
Or is it just CO3?
It was CO3. Like, if that stands for something, I'm not entirely sure. It
Yeah.
probably does. But CO3 takes over, and the game like progresses into a very similar vibe as Act 1, but one of these other 4 characters has completely taken over. And in Act 1, you were mostly just playing this game, and it was very D&D-esque feel. Act 2 comes along, and it's much more of like a explore around and fight these bosses, and at the end you get to be the best. And then Act 3 is the computer takes over, and he's like, my turn again. And you get very reminiscent of the gameplay style of Act 1, where you are locked in a building. There are some puzzles for you to solve to try and figure out, get some items that might help, and to improve yourself and get some more of the lore and like gameplay. The whole type of game once again evolves. The best part is that by this point you've mastered so much of this game that you're no longer scared to handle whatever he throws at you. So you start playing again this very 1v1 D&D style adventure with the robot, and he starts throwing you these different mechanics and different plays and different attacks, and everything's refreshing. It's no longer, here's this boss has extra health, or he does a lot of attack. It all still follows the rules of the game, but each time you set up is completely different, and you have a ton of fun as you dive into that, and his story starts to take a darker turn for Luke, as well as some of the stuff he starts looking into about where was this game made starts coming back to haunt him as the secrets of the game start coming out. And I thought I was just, I was like, this is a whole nother DLC. This is like a whole nother way to play. There's different types of cards. Your deck is completely different from what it's been, but it's still Inscryption. It's still the same game. So fun.
I think it was PO3. I'm pretty sure it's PO3.
Ooh, that sounds very right.
But yes, so going along with what you're saying, I definitely, I think decidedly, you mentioned like it's back to kind of the D&D style, but I think decidedly it is very much, you can tell that PO3 is not a good storyteller.
Oh, that was so funny. You're right.
You can tell that he either is not good or he just really does not care. His focus is completely on the cards and the game, whereas Leshy was very accomplished at setting the tone and setting the mood, because I do think this section of the game does get a little bit samey with the environments, because it's just all on this hollow table. Everything's the same color. Everything's the same. None of it's tangible. It's just light.
Yeah.
And so, but I do think that's completely on purpose. I think the game is making you feel like this guy doesn't know what he's doing, and part of that comes back. The reason why I think that is because the game at the end makes you remember what it was like to play with Leshy, and it's completely different, and it's just so much warmer, so much more fun, so much more inviting when you play with Leshy. And again, I do think that's 100%. This game has so many great mechanics and so much great gameplay, but in my opinion, my favorite part of the whole game was the narrative and how it tied all of the gameplay together. Because without that, it would be basically nothing. And so with Act 3, it turns, if Act 1 was a roguelike, and Act 2 was a deck builder, then Act 3 is a Souls-like. Because you are no longer, if you die, you don't restart everything. You have checkpoints, essentially your bonfires, and you're going and fighting bosses that, and not bosses, but enemies that respawn after you die, and you have to go back and kill those enemies and get back to where you were to get your money and to get your currency in order to not lose it. Because if you die before you get back, you lose it. So there is a little bit of that same risk reward. It's definitely a little bit downplayed, dialed back a little bit for this game. But again, this is one of those things where if you just keep throwing your head at the wall hard enough, then eventually it'll stick. But I did like a lot of the boss fights in this game. I thought the boss fights were really fun, or in this act. The boss fights, especially the most notable one for me was the one where you got on the internet.
Yeah, that was fun.
Yeah,
and the worst.
And I showed up and attacked you.
Oh, that was so. You saw that. I'm stuttering all over the place.
So you actually showed up and attacked me as well as a card, but I didn't screenshot it and send it to you because I knew you weren't there yet, and I didn't want to spoil it.
I appreciate that. That is nice of you. As the game plays, the game reads like your Steam friends and starts sending them as cards against you. And it was hilarious because you'd be like, oh, this is fine. And then one of your friends would show up as this just overpowered.
It's like a 12 attack, 7 health, like ridiculous number card.
You're like, you're kidding me. Why would you do this?
Yeah.
Oh, it was so fun.
Another standout in that ending bit was the one where it like gets access to your hard drive.
That was
and it's like,
nuts.
If you use this card and it dies, we're gonna delete your file.
So scared.
And I was like, frig, I don't remember what I used, but I'm pretty sure I used something like pretty valuable to my computer, and like some kind of school assignment maybe. And I was like, oh frig.
That was so funny. Yeah, it wages, and you're like searching through your own hard drive for like, okay, you need to find like a really hefty sized file. And I'm like, where's all my videos or movies or something? Come on, I need something big.
Yeah.
And then something valuable or something really old. And I was like, I don't have anything old. I don't know this. And it's like, it'll be okay. That was so interesting. Like, kind of put you in such a fun way where they broke the fourth wall in some really unique ways, using Luke to tell this like story of this mysterious game that had been built and all the creators had died or were missing or abandoned the project, and there was no known records of it. And at the same time, you were like, oh, that's cool. Look at him having his adventure. And then the game starts messing with your computer, and you're like, oh no, oh, it's my adventure. Oh, I don't like this anymore. What's going on? And it just like grabs you and sucks you back in. And I think that was such a good play for them. Because Act 3, like you're saying, the visuals were not there. It was so freaking boring. You're looking at this hollow table. Everything's blue. Everything's the same color. You just click, click, click. Where's the personality? Where's this atmosphere I've been looking for? And they compensate with like, okay, let's like mess with you a bit. Let's give you some more lore, and let you know that after this, as you complete this, we're not going to reset back like we did in Act 2. What happens now happens, and your choices are going to matter.
Yeah, and it does. It does feel soulless, but I think that's totally on purpose because you no longer have this guy who's really into storytelling and setting a cool environment for you to play in. You're literally your DM is a robot.
Yeah, like literally.
Right? and yeah, exactly. It's gonna be a subpar adventure, right? And even his whole quest line you go on is the whole point of it. It's literally the same layout as Act 2.
Yeah.
So it's not like he was creative. He just did the same thing. But I don't think that's a problem because the exhaustion that gets you as a player and those things, it feels like it's totally on purpose. And I forgive the game for it because even while I was playing, it felt like it was going on for a reason.
Yeah. I'm supposed to be bored right now. I'm supposed to not enjoy this bit as much because of what it is.
Yeah, when he's like, so you're traveling around the wasteland of robots and you have a spark that can reignite the robots. So yeah, that's basically how he explains it. He's like, yeah, so you do that. Yeah, exactly. He puts ums and ahs in there because he's like, you can tell he's like kind of half-heartedly trying to make this interesting, but like he doesn't really care. So I don't know. And you do have your own little escape room type puzzle solving to do in this section of the game as well. Again, it's not quite as compelling as the cabin. It doesn't feel as cozy, but it is very creepy still.
Ooh, I don't know how to do that. It's so creepy. You never know what's
super
gonna happen.
Creepy.
There's a jump scare in there, I believe.
And so it kind of all leads into, essentially the ending of the game, the whole point of this is that the robot PO3 wants to enact what's called the Great Transcendence, and that's why you go through all of these bosses, is because you need access to the hard drive so that he can download the game onto your hard drive, and he needs access to the internet so he can upload the game to the internet. So the whole point of this Great Transcendence is to upload Inscryption to the internet. He literally makes like a Steam page for it, and begins to upload the game. When you, thanks to your help, the other scribes come out, and Leshy specifically comes out and rips off PO3's head.
That's so awesome.
And you're like, holy freak, okay. But it was cool. And then the other two show up and they're like, okay, now you can do new game and reset this back to where it was. But then Grimora, she decides, hey, actually, let's just all die. Let's just end this forever. And which is for good reason, because there's the reason why this game is sentient and why there's so many secrets on this floppy disk is because there's some kind of demonic presence in this floppy disk. And I don't know exactly the lore behind that. I think the idea is like some weird German, like World War II, like, I don't know, creepy demonic stuff was put onto this disk at some point. And then the people who made the disk were trying to hide it. Mm-hmm. But regardless of what it actually is, she ends up saying, oh, look, we have full file access. And so she begins to delete the entirety of Inscryption. And you see all of this stuff being deleted, and the whole world around you gets deleted first. And you wake up in front of Grimora, and then you play a little game with her, and it's like, oh, this is what this game would have been like if you had played, if she had been able to take over, like Leshy and like PO3 did. And then, that falls away. And then the most powerful part of this entire game, the most like emotional I got this entire time, and the most effect it had on me, was when Leshy was in front of you.
That was crazy.
Yeah, it was insane. You sit there, wake up, same thing as Grimora. You appear in front of Leshy at the same table in the same cabin as before, and he says, "Oh," like he had his eyes closed, and he's like, "Oh, I didn't think I would ever wake again, but here you are. So would you mind playing one last game?" And he's like, and you're like, "Sure, let's play." And so it starts out like normal, and he's like, "You have your same deck as when you beat me before." So you're seeing all these familiar cards you've made and all those really big, powerful things. And as you fight Leshy, the world around you begins to disappear. And some of your cards disappear. Some of his cards disappear. The score, the thing that helps you keep score, disappears. And that's the thing that really got me.
Oh, yeah.
Is that as soon as that disappears, he is like, oh, well, I don't need to keep score. Let's just play. Because this is someone who's about to die. And it makes you feel like that. You're like, this guy's about to die. And his whole storytelling and his personality and everything, this is where it comes back. And you're like, oh my gosh, I miss Leshy. I miss that. And you're like, I wish I could play more games with this guy because I love him so much. Like all of a sudden, you because of the rest of the game that you've experienced, Act 2 and Act 1, you now are like, oh my heavens, I miss this dude. This is like my old friend, and it's incredible that the game's able to do that in like 12, 14 hours, whatever it is. It makes you nostalgic for a boss fight or for your previous stuff. And then, you just keep playing cards and you do damage to him, and you're not keeping track because the game he cares more about having fun than winning the game. And that was like the vibe you always got versus, PO3, which is direct contrast where it's like all he cares about is winning the game.
Yeah.
It's like if you beat a hard challenge that Leshy gave you, he would almost congratulate you. He'd be like, wow, good job. You beat the challenge. But, if you beat one with PO3, he's like, well, I'll guess I'll make something harder next time,
PO3 took it so personally. And
exactly.
Leshy was like, listen, I designed the game to be beaten and to be won. And you're really just like, maybe we've just got super bad Stockholm syndrome, but we were missing the first act where we were trapped in this serial killer's house playing a card game. I was like, dang, I'm sorry you have to go as you watch it all go.
Yep. And that was the biggest impact for me that whole time was just that, and it was powerful, man. I almost cried for real.
Yeah, because
I was like, this is so sad.
you really felt his the finality, the finalness, however
Yeah.
you want to say it, of
And
the
you're
moment.
grieving because it's like you said goodbye to a loved one a month ago,
Mhm.
and now they're dying. Whereas if we had just been playing with Aleshi and then he died, like that's not a huge deal because you don't really get that whole.
Mhm.
I wish I had spent more time with them.
Exactly.
But here we're like, oh man, I wish I had appreciated that first part of the game even more.
Mhm.
So
There's so much.
it just makes you want to replay it.
Right, yeah. And as you continue on, it was so interesting to see the characters kind of for what they really were, rather than
Mhm.
the darker side of them. As you play against them, you learn a little bit more about this and you get the feel of who they are. The wizard at the end just claws and rips and hangs on for dear life, trying to continue to
Mhm.
live. He's desperate and violent about it. And Leshy was so just calm and resigned. But
And so is Grimora
yeah,
too.
they were both like so mature about it. They understood, you know what, there was nothing I can do. I will enjoy what time I have left in the way I want to. And at PO3 you've been battling with, he was, bent on taking this demon global or doing this terrible thing. And the wizard at the end, who was a bad person, but had some fun students to fight. It was pretty fun to fight too. Holds on even as the game dissolves around you and all these like structures get removed and you're just in this white void fighting the wizards, especially after this emotional time with Leshy, and the wizard just does not give up. He's like, we will keep playing. You're not done yet. This isn't over. And I'm sitting there feeling resigned. Like, I'm sorry. I know you want to win, but it doesn't matter because you're going to be
Yeah,
gone.
it's too
soon.
late.
It's too late. It's too
Yeah.
late. Don't keep doing this. And he will not let go until the final moments, where he suddenly tries to change his personality, tries to reach out, like, can you just please? And then he's gone. And
Yeah, he's like, I
gone.
have to shake your hand. And that's another thing. Each one of them shakes your hand.
Right before they die.
Grimora and Leshy shake your hand. And as you shake their hand, they disappear. They get deleted. And that's also another, like, all of a sudden your hand is empty where someone used to be. And it's just,
it's nuts, man.
it's hard. It's hard
good imagery done so well. Such a great art in the game, used so well. This storytelling,
Mhm.
this gameplay, these graphics, like, this was a masterpiece game. I loved it.
Oh, big time. I think we're going to be talking about this one for years to come.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I know a lot of people had this on their Game of the Year list,
Mhm.
and I certainly would have if I'd played it last year.
Exactly.
And so I guess then after everyone gets deleted, all the new data gets deleted. You access the old data,
Mhm.
and you just see a bunch of redacted names and redacted stuff, and you're like, what the freak is this? And the game starts to glitch out, freak out, cuts to the live film of Luke Carter. He pulls out the floppy disk. He's obviously driven insane, and he takes out a hammer and starts destroying this floppy disk with a hammer.
Nuts.
And then it cuts a little bit, calms down a little bit, cuts to probably the next day where he's calling some kind of reporter and he's like, hi, I have evidence to prove that Game Funa was doing, which are the people who made Inscryption, was doing something messed up. I'm going to expose them for what they are. And so he begins to talk to him, where he gets a knock at the door. And he'd gotten a knock at the door previously in other videos from this lady who was trying to get that physical copy of Inscryption for obvious reasons. She works for Game Funa.
Mhm.
And he's like, seriously? So he goes, opens up the door, and he's like, listen, I already told you. And then just a gunshot. Boom.
Nuts. Out of nowhere.
And then he falls down dead. You see blood like spilling out next to him. And she walks over his body, comes into his house, and you hear the reporter say, hey, Luke, you there? Luke? And then the game just lingers there for a little bit, and you hear her walking around and whatnot. And then it just cuts off, and then the credits roll.
Crazy ending.
It's heavy. So cool. Such a good ending.
Mhm. So good.
I mean, it's definitely like an unsatisfying ending in a way, but the ending, I mean, it's still well done.
It
I
feels
really
real.
liked it.
It feels tangible.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like, and that's the game. It's like, dang, this is not a happy game. And this is not meant to be like perfect at the end. It is meant to conclude, and this is how it concluded. It was
Mm-hmm.
dirty, and it was violence, and it was real, and it was powerful.
Yeah, it didn't feel cheap because it felt like the game was leading up to something like that.
Mhm.
Yeah, it was still shocking, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know. It was great. So I guess let's talk about real quick. What was your favorite aspect of this game from a game development perspective? What do you think they did great? What do you think that they could have improved on, or that you would have improved on, or whatnot? Or I guess just point out, a good game design feature that you think went well, and why do you think it went well?
Gotcha. One thing, let me pause for a minute here. There was a lot of different aspects of the game that worked really well together, and I really enjoyed that synergy. Something that stood out to me was how they involved the player into such a well-built game. It involved you kind of personally. A lot of games end up feeling very detached, and like it feels like a video game instead of more of an experience. And something at the beginning that I really enjoyed was when you're playing against Leshy in Act 1 and you don't know any of this background of this game, this history or whatever, it doesn't matter. You are desperate to win. And the way that points work is there's a little scale that as you do damage directly to your opponents, points are added to the scale. And once the scale is all the way down on one side, that person wins. And so you want to like fill up his side of the scale. It weighs down, you're done. And there's a couple of mechanics that really stood out as like, oh, that's like a nice way. There's a couple of items you can use that help you like artificially or really quickly get points, so that if you're in a tight spot, you can get out of it. And I was like, oh, that's cute. Except that the items are like cutting out your eyeball and sticking it on the scale to weigh it down. And like your guy picks up the knife and points it towards the screen and stabs it into the screen, stabbing your eye out. And you pluck it out and drop it onto the thing. Unless she's like, bruh, what? And I was like, what?
Yeah.
That's what that does? Another one you get.
When I first got that knife, I was like, I thought I was going to try and stab Leshy or something.
Yeah, or like a
I thought I was going to attack him. But no, you just freaking stab your own eyeball out.
Yeah, another one you take a pair of pliers and rip a tooth out of your head and drop it onto. I was like, dang, what a crazy idea to like say like, hey, this item like helps you with some points. I'm like, oh, cute. They're like, it's also human, mutilating your body in a desperate attempt to get enough points to win against the psychopath that has you trapped in here. And I was like, oh, okay. And that little change of like, hey, what if the items you put on the scale aren't just like points, but they're like just anything that
Human
has weight?
teeth.
Yeah. Oh, hey, human parts have weight. What if you just put your teeth on there or parts of your face or whatever? Oh, that'd be really fun. And like that little
it's like Saw.
change,
It's freaky.
It just drives the horror component home. And that was something that stood out to me is they took the extra step with gameplay. Instead of just having a mechanic where you can help yourself, it was a mechanic that helped you and supported the narrative at the same time. And that really was like, that was a big game changer for me in the storytelling, where it felt that the tone shifted to something darker and something more real. And I really enjoyed that.
Yeah. I think my favorite point of this game, or like I think the greatest example of how this game does risk versus reward, or how it helps you make decisions, is with the sacrifice mechanic. I mean, that is in a way that is like one of the main mechanics of the whole game.
Yeah.
Is you are sacrificing things up until the last act. You are sacrificing things the entire time in order to allow you to place more things. And not only is that good for a narrative perspective, because it is, and it does really come into play in the narrative because it makes you feel guilty about sacrificing squirrels to summon a snake, But I do think like that sacrifice versus, what should I give up to play something down? It may lead some very, very interesting decision making, and overall a very satisfying gameplay experience, because when something goes right, you're like, yes, I gambled right and I made the right wager. If it goes wrong, you're like, shoot, I should have done this differently. And it never really feels unfair. And it doesn't feel unfair because you basically have so much information thrown at you in a way that is clear and concise. The attack and health numbers are very simply put. It's a low numbers card game. You're not dealing 5,000 damage per attack. You're dealing 5. And that's a high number for that game. And so it's overall just very, very satisfying. There's no fat in this game. It is all trim. It is lean. You never feel like you're wasting your time doing something, because it all contributes to the greater gameplay experience. So
absolutely,
that's my brief take. So, all right, let's go ahead and move on to subtitles and our brief reviews.
That's good.
I will go first.
Please do.
Let me flip to my page here where I've written some stuff down. So, for anyone who's new to watching this, we like to, at the end of our podcast, we like to add a subtitle to the game, which is, our last one was Spiritfarer. So we were like, Spiritfarer, a not so fond farewell. So we're adding the subtitle onto the game to like give it essentially a summary of what it's about in one sentence. So for this one, my subtitle was Inscryption, Just One More Game. And I think, and this is my brief review, Inscryption made a much stronger impact on me than I ever anticipated. Not only is it well designed in the 3 different aspects of it, or the acts, and the different parts of its gameplay, it goes out of its way to help you have fun, if you're willing to look for it. Like Leshy, I wish I could just keep playing even when you can't win.
That is excellent. Wow, that was really well put. I liked.
All right. Well, what is yours?
Dang. All right. So, my subtitle was Inscryption. You're already in too deep, which kind of like, I get the vibe up there. Inscryption draws you in with the promise of a card game, and the atmosphere draws you in faster than you intended. As you begin to play, you get so involved in the gameplay and story that time kind of washes away, and before you realize it, you're dealing with things bigger than you imagined. Kind of play off of that. At the beginning, you're excited for this little horror card game, and then by the end, you're feeling sad that you've lost friends, and you're accepting loss of real people and understanding that not everything lasts forever and that some things need to go away. And that tonal shift was just huge over the 14 hours I put in. As soon as I started, I didn't realize what I was in for. I was already in way too deep over my head and played it all the way through to the end. It was a great game.
Awesome. That is fantastic. I couldn't agree more. Do you have any closing thoughts? Anything else you'd like to put in here before we close this?
I'll just wrap up with a positive review. I put in about 14, little over 14 hours. Did 22 out of 30 achievements, so like a decent amount of it played. And I highly recommend this game. There's a reason it is so highly rated. It's because it's a great freaking game. Overwhelmingly positive is just the right description you need to be using for it. Highly recommend it to anybody playing. I feel like it's not too horror-y, scary enough for people that aren't really into like super spooky stuff. It's not too like visceral or violent, but it still brings just a great gameplay and beautiful atmosphere. I recommend it to anyone that enjoys games, even if you're not into card games or anything like that. The game isn't overly complicated. There's not hundreds of thousands of cards to learn and all these power systems. The game's straightforward and tells you what you need to do, and at the same time helps you explore and learn more on your own. Highly recommend it. Please play it.
Oh yeah, I exact same thing. It is incredible. Even if you don't really like card building games, I think anyone can really find something that they love about this game, because if you don't like building a deck, then I guarantee you that you'll love the story anyways. It's just so compelling. It's what kept me going, and it's what what really left an impact on me, even though the game itself was really fun. I also want to just mention that there is a mod for this game out called Casey's Mod, which essentially, I believe, takes the first part of the game where you're with Leshy and turns it into a proper roguelike where it's just kind of endless and you can do whatever. So that is an option if you're just kind of into that single aspect of the game. But yeah, that's what all I've got for now. Highly recommend. Please play this game if you have not already. I took about 13.8 hours based on Steam to beat it. And so but it is worth every single second, every single minute. It's not even fully priced at $60, I don't think. So totally worth it. Mm-hmm. And then quick announcement for our next game. We will be playing Risk of Rain 2. A little bit different than what we normally do. We're going to mostly be playing it together. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, there's not really a central story, I guess, but I think it'll be a fun experience, and hopefully we'll have a good time and we'll have a fun podcast ready for you when it comes out or when we're ready. So should be out sometime around the ending of February. I guess we have less time because February is a shorter month, but it should still be fun.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. We're looking forward to it. Thank you so much for listening. We really appreciate the support there. We hope you had fun. We certainly did playing the game. Hopefully you will enjoy our upcoming podcast episodes and perhaps even playing the games we talk about yourself. Thank you for tuning in.
Yes, thank you. Have a wonderful month.
We'll see ya.